This video is sponsored by Describe. Welcome to the Q&A video for December 2024. Since it's been a minute since I've done one of these, I'll refresh your memory. These are questions my patrons and YouTube members asked me since it's been a little hard for me to carve out time for live streams over the past year. So if you want to ask me questions for a future video like this one, sign up for my Patreon. It really means a lot, especially these days when I'm making so many videos that have TV show clips and often end up getting demonetized. So if you want to support the channel financially and you're able to do so, the link for the Patreon is in the description below. Now, without further ado, let's get into the questions. TurtleDove2470 asks, how would you deal/help with someone who has a high charisma character, but their player isn't that charismatic? For example, years ago I played a high-level Pathfinder character, like beyond level 20 high level. My sorcerer ended up having a 35 charisma stat, which was a plus 15 or something. Pathfinder is broken in the best way. I don't have that high a stat, so the idea was I gave bullet points of these big speeches I gave. How would you handle something like that? I think giving bullet points is the ideal way to handle this situation. I don't think it's enough to just say, I say something persuasive. I think it would be great if you could still present some idea of what you say. But I do think it's okay to say, I say something like this, and tell them about that. I honestly think that stuff works just fine. However, I kind of think we as GMs need to be a lot better about giving our players the space to just give us the cliff notes. When a player rolls a persuasion check or a deception check, or they want to give the speech and then roll to see if it was successful, but either way, there's usually some moment where we as the GM will say something like, okay, so what do you say? But what I've started doing is giving my players an immediate caveat. I'll say, okay, what do you say to them? You don't have to give me the exact speech, but generally, what arguments do you make to convince them to do what you've asked? And typically I found that that's sufficient to get the players to understand that I'm not expecting them to be Bill Pullman from Independence Day. Now, if they still want to do the big, awesome speech, then that's awesome, and they're more than welcome to do it. But giving them the space to say, give me the general gist of what you're saying, frees them from feeling like they have to be a gifted orator if that's not their skill set. It's also so funny that this topic becomes discourse on social media every couple of months because the answer seems so obvious. You just let people describe how they're being charismatic, the same way you let the barbarian player describe how their character is strong, or a rogue player can describe their character being dexterous. But part of the reason I think so many players and groups want to know how to handle the subject is because a lot of GMs just don't think ahead to this problem when they're talking to their players about these sorts of charisma-based challenges. I suspect a lot of GMs default to assuming their players will feel comfortable talking in character unless they say otherwise. But if you preemptively make sure that whenever you prompt them to tell you what their character says, you make sure to include the caveat that it doesn't have to be the exact words, just the general gist is fine, then I think that helps players not feel that pressure of having to come up with the epic speech on their own, if that's not something they're good at. Thanks so much for the question, I really appreciate it. Bella asks, how do you like to deal with differences in the combat power of player characters? Do you provide the weaker character with better/more magic items, tailor encounters to favor them, or do you use some other method of balance so one player doesn't get left behind? I haven't really had to worry about balance too much in the past few years, but since so many of us are either jumping into a new edition of D&D or switching systems entirely, I think more of us are going to be grappling with this. And honestly, my solution is going to be heavily biased toward a game like D&D 5th edition or 5.5, where the players get a lot of powers through leveling up. If you're playing a game where all their cool powers primarily come from finding magic items or learning spells, like a lot of OSR games, then that's going to be an entirely different discussion. And even if you're still playing D&D or a very similar game, my solution isn't necessarily the best solution for everyone, or even for every situation that comes up in my own games. But generally, I'll tell you how I try to handle balance issues between players and the logic behind my approach. You see, my feeling is, if you give one of your players a custom magic item that specifically helps them in combat, then every player is going to want a custom magic item that specifically helps them in combat. And if you do give everyone magic items, they're probably going to be comparing notes and judging whether the items they got are equal to each other. And of course, there's no reason they have to be, but again, from what I've seen, players often just can't help it. Oh, that sword sounds awesome. My weapon sucks in comparison. Some of that is just recency bias. New thing is best thing. And a lot of it is just your standard grass is always greener, keeping up with the Joneses mindset. But that's why I try not to specifically use magic items to solve balance issues. If one character gets a cool magic item and everyone else wants one too, then that's totally fine. That's part of D&D. You see other magic items, you think they're cool, you try to figure out where you can get your own, and that leads you toward new D&D adventures. A little friendly competition is absolutely fine. But it starts being an issue when that magic item was intended to solve a balance problem. Now, everybody wants an item, but not everybody has a balance problem to solve. And now the dynamic of the game is out of whack. Now, tailoring encounters is a whole other can of worms. I made a video last year about a fight I ran that was specifically designed to give the players a challenge, specifically because they were really used to casting Conjure Animals and Healing Spirit, and it was making all the fights really boring. So I was able to really challenge them with an ambush in a very enclosed space. But of course I couldn't do that with every fight, and I didn't plan to. That fight just helped me learn some lessons about how to make my combats a lot more dynamic for that campaign and that party. But also I wasn't targeting just one player, nor was I trying to give one player a chance to be awesome. And frankly, even if I knew the particulars of your group and knew what problem you were trying to solve, I still don't even know how I'd be able to design a fight so one player in particular felt awesome. Because I can't control how everyone else is going to act in the fight. Unless I introduce a specific antagonist that is meant to have beef with that player character, which is doable, and that's a whole other discussion. But if it's just a more conventional encounter, I don't know how to say, this fight is designed to give Jeffrey's character specifically a chance to be badass without being really overt about it. And even if I was subtle and the players just picked up on my intention, I honestly think the players get deflated if they catch on to the way you want them to play. They want the freedom to make choices in combat, but if they know what you want them to do, I think they tend to get bummed out because now there's a right answer. Maybe a player wanted to take on one of the bad guys in the fight because they had a cool idea for how to do it, but then they realized that bad guy is designed for Sandra's character, and they get annoyed by that. Or they don't realize it, and somebody pulls out a trick you weren't expecting and does something in the fight that takes out an element you included to make a different player feel badass. I've been that player before. We were in a dungeon, and there was a lock that had to be opened a certain way, but I just cast knock, and it opened. And afterward I realized, wait a minute, one of the player characters was specifically recruited because we knew we needed a drow to get through the dungeon. I think that's what that lock was about. I think I totally stepped on the part of the dungeon that my DM created specifically to give Kelly something cool to do in this adventure. And sure, my DM could have designed a dungeon that couldn't have been thwarted by a second level spell, but honestly, if you're a DM, you know you can't think of everything. If you design something that you expect to challenge one specific player, there's always a chance that some other player will figure out some cool idea that makes perfect sense and also completely screws up your plans. Obviously, this is all based on my experiences, your mileage may vary, but those are a lot of reasons why I find it's really, really hard to design a combat to boost up one player who is falling behind the others. So how do I solve this problem? Well, I try to figure out what specific game mechanic on that player's character sheet is causing the problem, and then I just hack it. I come up with some ruling that hopefully brings their power level closer to the rest of the party. Oh wow, the Arcane Archer really isn't feeling that useful in combat. Let's change the number of magic shots you get to take. That way everyone understands why you're making the change. You're not giving them a magic item, you're tinkering with the math. And the players will usually understand, yeah, okay, David isn't having a great time with this character, so hopefully this little change helps bring them up to the level of the rest of us. And that feels more fair than the other options I've mentioned. Additionally, if you're really clear that this isn't the final change, and you're going to keep an eye on it, then you're giving you and your fellow players the space to realize that the character still needs work and make further adjustments down the line. And now if the Arcane Archer seems way more powerful than everybody else, you can dial it back, and the other players should understand because they knew they were essentially playing with playtest material. We saw this at the very beginning of Campaign 1 of Critical Role. Percy was a gunslinger, but that class/subclass didn't exist in 5e, so Matt created a new homebrew version of a gunslinger as a fighter subclass. And for the first 20 sessions or so, he was still making tweaks every 5 or 10 games to try to get the balance right. And Taliesin understood he was working with new mechanics that were subject to change, so he never took it personally. When he was way more powerful than the other players, he understood that it had to be adjusted for the good of the group. Now, obviously this depends a lot on your players, and hopefully you have a better sense than I do of what method will work best for them, but those are the reasons why I think it's better in the long run to try to solve balance issues in the mechanics themselves, rather than trying to patch them with magic items or circumvent them with encounter design. Thanks for the question, Bella. I hope my answer helped. Speaking of using Critical Role as an example of how to handle things in our games, the Forever Dungeon Master asks, I wanted to know, what's an interesting/new insight about D&D and TTRPGs as a whole that you've discovered while rewatching and analyzing Campaign 1 of Critical Role? So the Chroma Conclave is probably my favorite arc from Critical Role, or at the very least it's really high up there. And I've gone back and watched several episodes from this arc over the years. Just out of the blue, I'll feel like rewatching a certain episode, I'll pop it on, and I'll either watch a scene from it or I'll just watch the whole thing. So I was really surprised to kind of find anything new through this watch through, let alone a major realization, which is that this arc definitely moved much slower than Matt expected. Now, I've mentioned that before in my videos, but the reason it surprised me so much is because I really like the pacing of the Conclave arc, with very few exceptions. It's a big, epic story, so I'm glad it had the breathing room it needed. But on a rewatch, it seems obvious that Matt never planned for it to go this long, and in fact, he was working hard to get them through it much, much faster. The primary reason it takes as long as it does for the Chroma Conclave arc to play out is because his players are treating the world of the game like it's a real place. If it's getting late in the day in the imaginary world of the game, they don't travel, they go to sleep. But typically that actually means they go to the tavern for an hour of gameplay time, and then they hang out in each other's rooms, and we get at least one incredible role-playing scene between two players that somehow manages to rewrite my brain chemistry and burn itself into my memory forever. So I never minded that it took longer, and in fact I never really noticed it until I started watching the full arc and taking notes for the series. The other reason the storyline is taking so long is because Matt decided each character would get a special magic item, and there are 7 players, and more, those magic items take more than one session to go find. They're becoming much more elaborate side quests. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are pluses and minuses to that approach, but it definitely extended the length of the storyline. But this also means that in the late 2010s, when I was running games that were heavily influenced by Matt Mercer's style, it was a mistake to try to mimic the slower, decompressed pace of the Chroma Conclave arc, because that approach really works best if it's determined by the players. If they're setting the tempo at something more decompressed, okay, that's fine. But if it's coming from you, then your games are probably just going to feel slow. Trust me, I speak from experience. But I hadn't diagnosed why that was such a persistent problem with my games until this watch-through, when I noticed just how often Matt is trying to push the players to move faster. Also, talking about lessons from Critical Role, Travis is great. I always liked him and I thought he was a great player and a fantastic role player, but it's not until you're watching and looking for tips and tricks that you just realize how gifted he is as a D&D player. It's kind of incredible. Thank you so much, Forever Dungeon Master, and I hope, based on your name, that you're happy with your lot in life, and if you're not, I hope you get a chance to be a player soon. Next up, Danny Kane asks, I've been running a one-on-one campaign for just over 2 years now with my husband. My husband also DMs for me in another one-on-one campaign. We find this works because we know each other super well, and it doesn't matter what our schedule is. If we know we have a sufficient amount of time in the evening, we will play, maybe once or twice a week. However, because of this, it has led to a bit of NPC saturation. When you're just one player, the DM will naturally want to give you people to interact with, and because it's just one person, especially over 2 years of play, it's starting to feel overwhelming. Do you have a good way of keeping everything on track, or just hope for the best when it comes to NPCs? I was thinking about keeping a spreadsheet, just wish I could find the time to do it. Honestly, there's a potential solution I can suggest, and then there's the slightly simplified version of that solution. We'll start with the more complicated one. This would require a little bit more work from whoever's GMing, but it might help. You give each other a card with the basic info about that character. The D&D Essentials kit has a lot of NPCs that the players could take on adventures with them, and so each character came with a little card, and you could hand the cards to the players. Tomb of Annihilation did something similar. You could hire a number of guides, and each guide had a handout that gave you basically their sales pitch, and each of these cards included some art of the characters, which meant the players could actually see the art and picture the character and even have a physical item that helps them remember who that character is. Now, you two don't need to make these cards in advance, but if you did, that would be the more complicated approach. Basically, one of you would have to come up with an NPC, find some art for them, and then throw a few relevant details onto the card, like their name, race, job, etc. And then the player could keep those cards, maybe take notes on the back, put them all in a binder like their baseball cards, and then you have everything you need. The biggest problem with this approach is how much of your prep time it takes up, but there's another big problem, which is that it's going to be much more obvious when the GM makes up an NPC on the fly, because there's no card. But that actually brings me to the simpler solution. When a new NPC is introduced, one of the two of you, either the GM or the player, doesn't really matter who, one of you just grabs an index card and jots down the important information. Name, ancestry, job, disposition, faction allegiance, etc. Maybe add a distinguishing feature like salt and pepper hair, freckles, burn scars on neck, etc. Or just name a real-world famous person. I was in a campaign where the GM would link each NPC with a famous actor or actress, like Emma Stone or Antonio Banderas, so we could have a clear mental picture in our heads. This works better with human NPCs, but then again, there are other solutions for non-human characters as well. For example, that campaign also had 4 Dragonborn brothers who were heavily influenced by the Ninja Turtles, so that made them easy to keep track of as well. We could remember sort of the color coding of which personality belonged to which brother. And then you can still drop that index card into a binder and pull it out to take notes on it whenever you need to, if that's the approach you want to take. Although you could also just stick with a spreadsheet instead if that's your preference, if you prefer to work digitally, and then it would just be super easy to find artwork online and link it to the characters. That's much simpler than adding artwork to cards. But I would just recommend, if you're thinking about doing a spreadsheet, just start now with the characters who start coming up in the game. You don't want to have to go back and make an entry for every NPC you've ever met, because not all those characters are going to come up again. So if you want to do a spreadsheet, just start now with the relevant characters, and when somebody pops up again from the past, make sure to include a note that they appeared previously and just jot down whatever you can remember from their previous appearances. Thanks for the question, Danny. I hope that helped. Noga Gordon asks, maybe you have some advice for a new player like me about a specific issue I realized I'm having. I, as a player, am often curious about various things in my campaign that my character has absolutely no reason, that I can think of, to be curious about. Is there any elegant way to pursue lore details or plot threads that I'm interested in, but still feel like I'm playing my character authentically? I guess the question I would have for you is, why wouldn't your character be interested in that? First of all, if the lore is relevant to the story, then your character can just be interested in that because it's relevant to what's going on. You don't necessarily need to justify it. If it seems relevant to what's happening in the campaign, then I think it's perfectly reasonable to have your character care about it. But also, characters can just have interests and hobbies and just want to know about stuff. For example, let's look at the character of Jane from Firefly. He's the big, muscle-bound meathead who loves guns and money and women and not much else. And he was mostly kind of an incurious guy. He wasn't really curious about River's traumatic backstory or her weird talents and skills, or Inara's personal demons, or everything Simon had sacrificed to help his sister. And yet Jane was always the first person in the group to notice whenever Shepard Book seemed to know things a preacher wouldn't know. And that was a very deliberate choice, because it didn't have to be Jane who was intrigued by that. He's a suspicious guy, sure, but so is Mal. And Mal did have questions during the one episode where Book's backstory seemed plot relevant. But most of the time, when Book seemed to have an odd amount of info about the criminal underworld for a preacher, Mal had other stuff going on and it wasn't focused on Book. You could also argue that Jane has a lot of experience himself with weapons and tactics and crime, so of course he'd notice that stuff. But Zoe has a lot of that same info and experience. But Jane is often the one that noticed that Shepard seemed to have a lot of non-Shepardy knowledge. And honestly, it was probably just convenience. Jane and Book were sometimes left behind on the ship, so they'd get to talking, and then when they're picking up info about what happened to Mal and Zoe or Mal and Wash, they can share insights, and Jane can remark, "Hey, it's weird you know so much about crime." But also, it can still work perfectly fine for Jane's character to be the one who always catches Book's anachronistic knowledge. Because honestly, why wouldn't it fit his character to be a little bit curious? Now I'm assuming you're talking about lore or plot threads that your character is at least aware of. But if you're talking about something your character doesn't know, but you do, if we're talking about metagaming but trying to come up with a reason why your character could look into something that you only know about out of character, then no, I don't really think there's any organic way to discover that information. In fact, that's actually one of my biggest pet peeves, when players just decide their character is going to look into something because they know about it as a player and they want to be able to act on it in the game. I didn't assume that's what you meant, but if it was, then I'm the wrong person to ask about investigating stuff in character, because I kind of hate when players do that. So I'm assuming that you just mean, something's happening, I don't know why my character would be curious, and to that I'd say, if you're curious, your character can also just be curious. Noga, I hope that helped. And finally, Daniil Dmitriev, hope I pronounced that correctly, asks, how would you go about creating epic, memorable combat encounters for smaller D&D parties? For context, I've recently started running my first D&D campaign for a group of 3 players. While it has been a blast, I found it challenging to create epic fights that have the awe factor of facing a mighty enemy like a dragon, while not falling into the pit of slog or the abyss of a TPK. Have you ever faced such a challenge in your own games, and how did you tackle it? My answer is to listen to episode 4 of Worlds Beyond Number. This is an actual play audio podcast created by Brendan Lee Mulligan, Abria Iyengar, Erika Ishii, and Lou Wilson, and I've only listened to like the first 5 episodes, I'm way behind. But at the beginning of episode 4, the party, which is also just a party of 3, just like your group, in episode 4, they fight a very low-level monster. I mean, it is a monster that can be nasty for a low-level party, it is by no means a pushover, but it is still a low-level creature. We're going to talk about this with incredibly minor spoilers, but if you truly don't want to know anything about the campaign before you go listen to it, feel free to turn away now. Still here? Okay, cool. So the party fights a shadow. Just one. And Brennan is exceptionally good at making it feel like just being in this monster's presence is a big deal that feels fundamentally wrong. Like it inherently does not belong in this world.
Not only do you feel the light being robbed from you, as you take 10 points of necrotic damage and 4 points of strength damage, you feel life itself being taken from the parts of you that are touched by this magic. Your blood stops flowing in your body, your organs shrivel, your muscles contract and deteriorate. The process of entropy, pure and unmitigated by the presence of life itself, acts on your body in the fluid form of where the shadow touches you.
Part of the reason this is so effective is because Brennan has been very clear by this point in the campaign that magic and monsters aren't common. So seeing a monster is a big deal. And because he keeps that concept in mind throughout the campaign, this helps make this monster's reveal and its presence feel significant and scary and awe-inspiring. And I think that's generally the best approach for making sure the fights feel awe-inspiring like you're going for. Really just revel in the fact that these are powerful creatures who do not feel mundane in any way. Obviously, I don't expect any of us to be as good at narrating damage as Brennan or Matt are, but that is still where I'd advise you to focus your energy. If you can make sure that each strike, or at least each creature's first strike, feels impactful and meaningful, that can go a long way toward avoiding a slog, because you're just flavoring the fight to be a lot more interesting. So even if it's over in just a round or two, you can still infuse the monster with a lot of menace to help them stick in your players' minds better. Again, you don't need to go on a monologue like Brennan, but you can focus on the way these impacts make the players feel. Describe the way the sword cleaved into their shoulder, or the feeling of dragon fire burning their flesh. Even if your players still mop the floor with the monster, you can hopefully still make each encounter feel awe-inspiring just by narrating it in such a way that makes it seem like the monster is a big deal. So, seriously, I know it's kind of a short answer, and I'm not sure if it's going to cover everything you're looking for, but my advice is really just simple to listen to episode 4 of Worlds Beyond Number. I kind of think it has exactly what you're looking for. And if it doesn't, let me know in a future Q&A if there's some other tactic you'd like me to cover instead. Now, obviously, the atmosphere for this scene that I just played is heavily enhanced by music and sound effects, but ultimately none of that is the stuff that really matters. The thing that makes this scene work is the way Brennan makes this shadow feel like an incredibly dangerous monster that's practically beyond any sense of mortal comprehension. And I'll be honest, it's hard to get that balance right. Narrating a monster and getting that idea across can be a real challenge, especially if you or your players have been playing for a long time and you've become desensitized to how weird and horrifying some of these monsters actually are. Thankfully, you don't need to come up with any of that narration on your own, because you can use today's sponsor, Describe. Describe is an incredible resource where a team of any award-winning writers create fantastic scenes that you can read aloud in your own games. And this is the perfect tool to use if you want your narration to really bring these monsters to life and make them feel like nightmares made manifest and set loose upon the world. Of course, it can't be denied that the music really helped set the scene we just heard and helped make the monster feel like a big deal. And obviously that's easy to edit into an actual play show, but much harder to do at your own table, right? No, of course not. You should know better than that by now. Describe also has an incredible audio library full of music and sound effects, so you can enhance your game without having to hire any editors to punch it up after the fact. You can make your game feel like a movie or a TV show or a radio drama. It's amazing. And Describe is offering a great discount to the viewers of this channel. If you visit describe.com/supergeek and use the promo code supergeek at checkout, you can save 10% off of your first subscription payments. Once again, that's dscryb.com/supergeek and use the promo code supergeek. Thanks so much to Describe for sponsoring this video. Thanks so much for watching. I'll be back with another one of these very soon.
Don't do it!
What?
Don't do another Q&A video.
Well, I have to. Until I can actually start live streaming again, this is the best way to give the people what they paid for and fulfill a Patreon tier.
I understand that, but maybe these videos should be Patreon exclusives.
Well, I think this is great content that anyone would want to watch.
But they don't. They're not watching these videos. They're only hurting you in the algorithm. You should just make these Q&As into Patreon-only videos going forward.
Oddwick, the algorithm isn't everything.
After the year you've had so far? Yeah, it kind of is.
Okay, point taken. I'll think about it. It does kind of make sense. These are meant to replace some Patreon-only live streams, and those were only going to be seen by the people who support me on Patreon, so...
So it would make sense to have these videos only available on Patreon.
I'll think about it. I'm actually still optimistic that I'll be able to get my schedule under control by next week, week after, and I'll be able to start live streaming again.
Yeah. Maybe.
Look, I know, but I'm getting caught up on stuff. I'm getting a lot done every week now.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Alright, leave me alone. Alright, so... yeah, it's not a sure thing, but probably going to be the case that these Q&A videos will only be available to view if you're a Patreon subscriber or a YouTube member. And if I don't do another one of these very soon, it'll be because I'm back doing live streams, so my patrons and YouTube members can just ask me questions directly. So if you want to join me on either of those platforms, check out the links in the description below. While you're down there, like and subscribe, ring the bell, and sign up for my newsletter. All those links are down there too, you can't miss them. In this video, we talked about a lot of important questions, but here's one question we often talk about. Should you start your campaign in a tavern? I answered that question in this video right here. Go check it out. Until next time, play fair and have fun.